Thank you so much, Antoinette. And I'm so glad to be here and thank you for the introduction. Although I'm not definitely the star of the show, I'm very excited to introduce and be in conversation today with Tanah Sullivan, who is the group head of sustainability of GoTo. So the GoTo Group was formed in 2021 in a historical merger between Indonesia's two most valuable startups, the ride-hailing giant Gojek and the e-commerce firm Topopedia. And so as the group head of sustainability, Tanah focuses on where the company can now make the biggest impact for all of its stakeholders in line with pressing environmental and social issues. And with the GoTo Group contributing to more than 2% of Indonesia's GDP, we're very excited to learn more about GoTo's approach towards zero emission, zero waste, and zero barriers. Tanah will kick us off with a short presentation followed by our Q&A. So tell us more about these plans. Let's take it away to Ms. Tanah Sullivan. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Angela. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today speaking with all of you and hopefully sharing something insightful as it relates to GoTo Group and our big 3-0 commitments for 2030. So Angela already kind of overviewed or provided an introduction to who we are as GoTo Group. I'm just going to quickly, very briefly introduce the companies that are within our group for all of you who may not be so familiar with us. So first up is Gojek. As Angela already mentioned, Gojek is one of the largest digital on-demand services company in Indonesia. Prior to the merger with Topopedia, we were focused on ride-hailing, food delivery, logistics, the whole shebang. It is an on-demand platform. It is present in 3 countries in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Singapore. And we were pioneer of the multi-service ecosystem model. The mission of Gojek was always to remove life's daily frictions. So what we wanted to do was connect consumers to the best goods and services in the market and be able to pay for them also online in a very seamless way. The vision was to become a hyper-local marketplace, connecting all these millions of consumers, driver partners, and merchants across the country and across the markets where we operate. Right now we have kind of 3 verticals, which I mentioned before: mobility, food delivery, and logistics. And under each of those verticals, there's a multitude of products and services that we offer for our consumers. Some of which you may be familiar with if you've ever traveled to Indonesia or even been to Singapore or Vietnam and you've been able to try out some of our products. As I mentioned before, we're operating in 3 main markets, actually, not just cities, but markets. Main cities across 3 Southeast Asian markets. We've got around 2.5 million driver partners, over 1 million GoFood merchant partners, and more than 14 million orders delivered across more than 200 cities by our logistics platform. And that's, by the way, data for 1 year only. So you can imagine the reach and the amount of things that are facilitated, so goods and services and people that are facilitated across our platform, across the region every single day. Next up is Topopedia. So this is the largest e-commerce company in Indonesia. The vision was to build a super ecosystem where anyone could sell anything to anyone in Indonesia, with the mission of democratizing commerce, meaning that they wanted to eliminate all barriers to e-commerce and allow the millions of sellers across Indonesia to be able to sell anything essentially to anyone without any kind of obstacles or hurdles. There are 550 million products. I won't read out every single here. Over 40 digital products. Almost 87% of the merchants on Topopedia's platform are first-time merchants. These are micro entrepreneurs. So it can be you or I just as easily selling something from our home, something we've made, something we've bought, something we want to pass on. It's an incredible network and reach that Topopedia has in this country. And on top of that, now since the merger with Gojek, of course, the reach has expanded exponentially more. I'm just going to very quickly touch upon some of the verticals as I did with Gojek for Topopedia. So there's 4 main verticals here. The first one being marketplace and digital goods. So this is where we connect the merchants and the buyers. And it empowers, it'll provide different products and services specifically for the merchants to be able to allow them to do more. As mentioned before, 86.5% of them are first-time merchants and also using a digital platform for the first time. So it's incredibly important for us to ensure that they have the resources and the support that they need to be able to sell and be able to, position and market their products on the Topopedia platform to the widest number of consumers possible across the country. The next vertical is fintech and payment. So similar to what we do at Gojek with GoPay, Topopedia also has its own fintech and payment services platform. And here this is about the digital wallet, as you can see, affordable investments, loans that we provide for our merchants as well, everything around credit scoring and lending. These are all kind of all in one platform, and it obviously allows for much more seamless user experience and merchant experience as well. The third vertical is around logistics and fulfillment. Topopedia does have its own fulfillment centers across the country, as well as working with third-party logistics partners to ensure that the 1 million+ packages that are distributed across the country every day get to where they're supposed to get to in the shortest amount of time and in the most efficient manner as well. As you can all imagine, this is a very complex operations, but I think now after almost 12 years in operations, Topopedia has got a pretty good handle on it. The fourth vertical is called Mitra Topopedia. Mitra means partner in Indonesian. This really enables small merchants to sell their digital goods, but keep their offline stores. So these are for merchants who already had offline presence or offline stores. And allow stores to buy their products in stock in wholesale as well. This is still in Indonesian, these products, but I'm happy to explain even further for anyone who is interested. Or you can check out the Topopedia website, of course, or the GoTo company website as well for more information about this. But essentially, there's over 40 products that Topopedia has. Everything from being able to buy your plane tickets, to top up your mobile phone credit, to paying your electricity, to all the financial services that are on offer as well, that I went into detail before. Also connectivity with some of the government online services. So things like tax, the health ministry as well, and other things. And then there's the final one being giving back to society, which is things like where consumers can actually donate money directly to specific projects or initiatives through the Topopedia platform, as well as pay for zakat for those who are familiar with it. It's the 2.5% that you pay as a Muslim. Indonesia being the largest Muslim country in the world, this is very important for us. All right, before I get into the next slide, I actually want to, so that's, just share, that's the overview of Gojek and Topopedia. And as Angela mentioned already, last year we got married and made the largest digital ecosystem in the country and in the region as well. I think now with our forces combined, we're able to offer our consumers an even better experience, an even broader wealth of services and products that meet their daily needs. On top of course, continuing to drive the positive impact, both economic and social, in this country and in the other markets where we operate. That's where me and my team and the rest of the organization comes in as well. So Angela mentioned a little bit, and Antoinette as well in the introduction, the 3 zeros: zero emissions, zero waste, and zero barriers. How did we get to those? If I can sum them up, they really are the North Star of our company. So when you say, we are a business by nature, our natural instinct is to make sure that we are maximizing profit for our shareholders. That's what all companies are designed to do. But we'd like to think we're a little bit different. Our North Star is actually our 3 zero commitments, whereby we are still a positive force for economic growth in this country and the markets where we operate. but we will not do it at the negative impact or degradation of the environment. We will not do it if it doesn't move or progress our merchants and millions of driver partners and users forward from a socioeconomic perspective. And we certainly won't do it if our platforms aren't accessible and inclusive and provide equal opportunities for all. So how did we even get to the 3 zeros in the first place? We conducted what we called a materiality assessment last year. And so what that means really is a whole lot of conversations with a whole lot of people and stakeholders in our company and across our ecosystem. So people like our users, our driver partners, our merchants, as well as our investors, government, civil society, NGOs, and other experts that we work with on a very regular basis. Anyone basically who comes into contact with our company or our platform or in our ecosystem, we wanted to talk to them and make sure we understood what they thought were the biggest sustainability challenges impacting their daily lives, and that they believed GoTo as a joint Gojek Topopedia company, the issues where we were able to have the most impact. And so here's where we came up with the topics, what I would call the material topics to our company as it relates to environmental, social, and governance matters. And so what you see in the top right corner in the green there, everything that's in there, those are what we consider the high priority topics. So this is what not just our leaders like our CEOs or our executive level leaders were telling us were important, or our investors, but this is from an assessment of all the broad perspectives that we gathered during the materiality assessment process. And this is where we landed. These are the issues that they told us were important to them and that they believed we could do something about. So here you see the range of things, and it's all color coded. So in green is all the environmental issues. In orange are all the social issues, and in purple are the governance issues, which means things that we set up as a company to make sure that we are responsible. We are a responsible company, we are a transparent company, and we are an accountable company for our footprint, for our impact, and for our ecosystem as well. Now, I do just want to add, everything that's considered medium or low priority in this matrix, it doesn't mean it's not important to us at all. We actually do respond to these as a company, but in terms of what we prioritize, because we have to be hyper focused on the things. We can't do everything at once. And so that's why this is so important, I think, to map these issues out on a matrix, see what you consider the most priority, and then tackle things from there. Taking things day by day and bit by bit, I think, is incredibly important. And so this assessment process we will do every 2 years to make sure that what we consider important today remains important on a regular basis to our stakeholders and to our company. So these high priority issues that you saw on the previous slide, we could actually bucket them if we took the top 15 that were in those in the green area of the matrix. You could actually categorize them into 3 main buckets. One being emissions or climate action. So what we're doing to prevent climate change or to reduce our negative impact on the climate. Second is around waste. So how we build a circular economy, how we close loops in our ecosystem and on our platforms, and how we avoid and reduce and turn off the tap on new materials entering our ecosystem or our platforms in the first place. And then how we ensure that we are managing and processing that waste on the downstream side as well. And the third one on barriers, which I would actually say has always been in Gojek and Topopedia's mission and DNA as companies, was to be, as I mentioned before, a positive driver in this country and in the region where we operate. So what does this actually mean? There are 2 dimensions to zero barriers for us. One is internal, meaning that we really focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion indicators, making sure that our employees feel valued, engaged, are supported, feel safe, basically that they can come to work and be their whole selves and not feel like they have to hide any part of themselves. Because for us, it's incredibly important that our employees are able to feel like they can be their authentic selves and are valued. Their perspectives have a meaningful contribution to our company today and in the future. The second dimension is external. So this means how we support the millions of drivers and merchants who are on our platforms, who actually rely on our platforms for a significant or even, only source of their livelihoods or income. That is the huge responsibility that we have, and we don't take it lightly. So for us, it's about ensuring that whatever we do for our drivers and merchants, it's contributing to their long-term economic well-being so that they can move up socioeconomic tiers, so that they can actually have the skills and resources and support they need. Maybe a Gojek driver doesn't want to be a Gojek driver forever. So what does he or she need to be able to move on to different things and new paths in their future? How do we make sure that our drivers and merchants aren't just one emergency bill or medical emergency away from falling below the poverty line? These are huge issues that we need to tackle. We cannot do it alone. None of these issues actually we can tackle alone, but we are trying, as I mentioned before, to do things and approach things day by day, bit by bit, all in the right direction, knowing that these 3 zeros are our North Star. So we are always looking towards them as we build our company's strategy and growth and projections and all those things that companies are very good at doing. We make sure that these 3 zeros sit at the core of all of those discussions, all of those plans that we're making. In a little bit more detail, and this might trigger some more questions, I hope, zero emissions, what does it actually mean? So for us as GoTo, we know almost 90% of our entire emissions footprint comes from the mobility services and logistics services that happen across our platform every single day. These are millions of kilometers we're talking about. And so for us, the first step is about accounting for that emissions, knowing what we actually emit as a company and as an ecosystem, and then starting to prioritize and tackle the sources of those emissions in the first place, because our goal is to get to net zero by 2030. That is a huge undertaking. I'm not sure if many of you know this, but all of the vehicles on our platform are not owned by us, meaning that our drivers actually own their own vehicles. So for us to set a target like 100% electric vehicles by 2030, which is actually a target of ours, by the way, we need to support our drivers to be able to change their bikes or their cars, so any vehicles they have then they're using for the Gojek platform, for example. We need to be able to support them to change from conventional vehicles to electric vehicles. Why? Because electric vehicles, we know, emit up to 70% less emissions. And over an entire life cycle of an electric vehicle, the costs are actually much lower for our drivers than they are compared to conventional vehicles. So this is one huge challenge that we're working on right now. You saw the numbers before. We've got around 2.5 million drivers. This will continue to grow as we expand as an ecosystem as well. So this is something that's incredibly complex that we have to work with so many partners with, not just because we have to look at the cost of the bikes themselves, but also what kind of charging and swapping infrastructure exists in Indonesia and Singapore and Vietnam, and then how we can work with the government to make sure that the grid, the power grids, for example, that are providing that energy are actually renewable energy sourced and not from coal. What we will measure for this, it's really straightforward, this one. It's every year, are we getting closer to zero? So every year we'll do an emissions inventory. We will count the emissions that our ecosystem produces. And then from there, report it so that everybody knows whether or not we're on track to hitting our targets or not. The second one is around waste. Here it starts to get a little bit more complicated. Why? Because you can't count waste necessarily the same way you can calculate your emissions. And so for us, it's really about reducing the waste that's generated from our company's direct operations and in the business lines where we have control. Meaning on the Topopedia side, we have fulfillment centers that we know we operate, we have teams working out of, where we can have some control over the waste that is generated, but also on the upstream side, the type of tertiary packaging that is used for the products distributed from our fulfillment centers. On the GoFood side, we have things called cloud kitchens. Cloud kitchens are an incredible service, I think. It's around 8 to 10 merchants that can operate out of just one cloud kitchen. So for us, it's working with those merchants, working with our partners to convert as many cloud kitchens as possible to zero waste, meaning there is absolutely no waste generated from these cloud kitchens. And so far, we've hit around 10%, which is good, of cloud kitchens in total in Indonesia. Which is great considering the number of them that we have across the country, but we have to do more. And so this is something also that we're working on. On top of that, we have still an entire ecosystem of millions of sellers, merchants who are deploying packages and all across the country every single day. And so for us, it's what do we do about that? So I think the first thing, which is currently what's underway right now, still in progress, is we're doing a whole entire footprint of our waste generated from the ecosystem. So what does that actually mean? Well, we're largely assuming numbers here. It is not going to be as precise or scientific as calculating our emissions, because we can't go to the millions of merchants' houses who are selling products from their houses to know exactly what they're doing as it relates to packaging. And at the same time, we also don't know that once a package gets delivered to a consumer, what the consumer is also doing with it, because it only becomes waste when somebody throws it away. And so for us, it's largely doing an extrapolative process, meaning that we are assuming a lot of data points here. We are only able to take samples from certain numbers of our consumers or our merchants, and it isn't by any means really reflective of the entire kind of complex web that exists on our platforms. But that said, we have to do something. We have to count something and calculate something so that we can at least know whether or not we're doing better every year or we're doing worse. And so for us, we'll use the annual waste inventory the same way we would emissions, with the hopes that as the years go on and as we get closer to 2030, I don't think we're just hopeful, we're very optimistic that there'll be more solutions and more partners coming to markets like Indonesia with great alternatives to single-use or plastic packaging. And we'll also be able to help and support and scale some of the efforts on the waste management and processing side as well, so that we're diverting as much as possible waste that's going to landfill. The final dimension here, zero barriers, and I would rate these actually very nicely in terms of complexity, in terms of how we're approaching it. Zero barriers is incredibly complex. I think most of you, if not all of you, are from the Philippines. This is a very similar market here in Indonesia that we have in terms of socioeconomic demographics and breakdown and what have you. There are a lot of people here in Indonesia who are doing really, really difficult. What's more, during the pandemic, who have been hit very hard from a financial standpoint, from an economic standpoint. And so for us, it's about what can we do to make sure that our platforms are accessible to everyone, and that for someone who is earning an income from one of our platforms, whether it's Gojek, whether it's Topopedia, that they're not struggling. So for us, the key kind of metrics here that we're looking at is really how many of our driver or our merchant partners are earning on our platforms. Do they have the tools and support network that they need to be able to be resilient from an economic standpoint? And what does this actually look like for them on a day-to-day basis? So because income is only one indicator of livelihood or well-being. So for us, we look at the full picture, right? In some cases, we have the father, for example, being a Gojek driver, and you have the mother, for example, being a Topopedia merchant. And so for us, that's one whole household that has exclusive kind of income generation from our platforms. Again, as I mentioned before, that's a huge responsibility for us. This is challenging, the most probably challenging, because it is the most difficult to measure. And it requires a lot of multi-stakeholder partnerships, meaning that we have to work very, very closely with the government, who sets things like minimum wage benchmarks or living wage benchmarks, or supports us in different ways, providing economic support and social security support for our drivers, for our merchants, and what have you. But for us, really the goal or the objective here is to get to provide the opportunities for as much socioeconomic mobility as possible, meaning our partners, our drivers and our merchants are able to move up in economic levels, if you're looking at it from a socioeconomic standpoint, and that they're not, as I mentioned before, just one emergency away from falling below the poverty line. So that's really our goal here. On top of that, as I mentioned before, there's an internal aspect, which is what we're doing as a company to make sure that all of our employees feel safe, supported, engaged, valued. So these are things like launching employee resource groups, or providing very transparent and unbiased recruitment and career development opportunities within our company. Improving our representation. I think there's not one organization on this planet, or country on this planet actually, that can say that they've achieved full gender parity, meaning 50-50 representation. Not even the top one, the last time I checked, on the World Economic Forum's gender gap index. I think it's Norway, they're still at, or Iceland, they're still at 89%, if I'm not mistaken. So it's incredible that in this day and age, we still do not have a beacon of hope in terms of getting gender equality right, whether it's from a market or country perspective or a company perspective. And so we take this with full responsibility as well. And I think we are not perfect. And so for us, it's making sure that we have equal representation as it relates to the women and men who work for us, that we have equal access to opportunities for the women and men and all other underrepresented groups in the very unique and multi-ethnic and multiracial countries where we work in. So I think for us, it's all of those very, very exciting but challenging kind of diversity and inclusion efforts also that we really prioritize as a company. I think I've talked a lot already, and I've gone into a lot of details as we've gone through the kind of introduction for zero emissions and zero waste and zero barriers. I will keep this slide up, I think, if that's okay with the team, because it will provide a little bit more detail. Maybe I missed something or didn't cover something, or it triggers some questions from the audience. But otherwise, I think this is really at the end of my presentation. I'm really excited about getting into some discussions and getting into some questions as well. I'll hand it back over to Angela.
Thanks so much, Tanah. I also learned a ton, and I'm, still trying to digest some of the things you said. If I think we were to summarize what you said in a one word, the word that I think of is actually ambition. And I think that speaks to a ton of, the ambition of the Indonesian digital ecosystem, the ambition of the 3.0 framework that you shared. And specifically, I think for me, what really stood out is the goal of converting the 2.5 million and growing drivers and their vehicles, which GoTo does not own, into electric vehicles by 2030. And so I guess I want to use that as a jumping off point. Yeah, because I think oftentimes when you talked about the comparison, I think, between the sustainability goals and the economic impact goals is that the sustainability goals are now well understood, right? So things like emissions and waste are almost more tangible than things like economic impact. And when we think about sustainable lifestyle, I think in the context of Southeast Asia, it's often thought of as a luxury. It's something to be had once you've had your bottom of Maslow's hierarchy met, of being able to be resilient and not have been impacted, let's say, very badly by COVID. But I think really you were presenting a picture of like, what does improving the quality of life look like in the context of sustainable lifestyles by decoupling that economic growth from the resource degradation that typically happens with economic growth, right? And I think one thing that cannot be overlooked is that GoTo is a digital, a massive, super app, several digital platforms. But there is like this digital side of when things are being digitized, there is less resources being used in a lot of cases. And you also have the challenge of, I guess, not owning the assets and not having visibility, as you shared, over the users' activities. Yeah, so I wonder if can start by that thread of what do you think are some of the advantages that GoTo is coming to this challenge with, that if, let's say, if you are a conglomerate operating in traditional industries where those three things around zero emissions, zero waste, and zero barriers would be different in how you would approach those challenges?
Well, I think it's precisely because we're not anchored in one industry, and on top of that, not being in an established industry, right? I think that gives us a real advantage. This union with Topopedia, between Topopedia and Gojek, was also incredibly powerful. This market or this region has not seen anything like it before. And so for us, it's really, we're able to harness each respective company within GoTo Groups, each respective company's strengths, and leverage those for our, to be able to meet our sustainability goals. And I can give you a great example as it relates to, for example, the zero emissions, right? So on top of not just shifting kind of Gojek driver partners to electric vehicles, we're also working through Topopedia's channels and network to be able to shift some of the third-party logistics partners that we work with for our fulfillment centers, also to electric vehicles. The GoSend drivers that would also be deployed from a Topopedia fulfillment center will soon be an electric one as well. And so for me, it's kind of all interconnected because we have built, I guess, what you call a mini universe where as a GoTo user, you can do everything on our platform. It's not to say we want to be all consuming and all powerful, but just that efficiency, I think, because we can identify synergies across the different companies, across the different platforms, and we can definitely use that to our advantage, whether it's the logistics expertise of the Gojek side, or it's the production / distribution network of a Topopedia, where you've got, again, millions and millions and millions of merchants who are using it, and consumers, who are using it every single day, and it's an incredibly complex from an operational standpoint, it's an incredibly complex process, right? Because I can order something from any part of this country, which is known, as the largest archipelago, known to have huge infrastructure challenges, and expect that I would have a package by the next day, which isn't that bad, considering we're not operating in a market like the US, where everything is very interconnected with good infrastructure. And so for us, I think that's really what I would say comes down to our advantage, is the fact that we can identify those synergies, we can leverage each other's strengths, and we've really done a good job of kind of building on those so that we can achieve our sustainability goals. And the other thing I will say is that our sustainability goals are one sustainability goal, right? We have one set of goals for all three companies. I haven't talked much about GoTo Financial. It is a separate company within our group, and it's doing a lot of things in terms of financial inclusion as well. But what most people know is this union between Gojek and Topopedia, and this is where, as the largest kind of tech players in Indonesia prior to the union, I think it's just been an incredible marriage of two very like-minded, similarly values-driven organizations to be able to give birth to this GoTo that is really truly working towards these big 3 zeros. Together and jointly and alongside having different sets of partners and stakeholders, really making sure that we really align and make sure that we're again leveraging each other's strengths and making sure that we're closing gaps where relevant.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting, that the strength is coming from a point of view of this hasn't existed in the past. So for instance, if you're like an airline, there are already benchmarks where, this is where the airline industry is headed in terms of emissions, and this is what we're trying to hit. But I think in this case, it's completely non-existent. There's
exactly. It's kind of like the Wild West.
Yeah, so I mean, in the sense that the group now is a merger, and you were, talking earlier about how there's no way that even now, as such a a powerful union, there's no way that the group can do everything on its own, right? Because some of these are of national and national strategic importance. What are some of the ways that now you incorporate these goals with how you engage with the partners? How do you bring them along? How do you communicate to them with these goals, and how do you convince them to make some sort of these front end investments to convert the vehicles to electric, for instance?
It's a really great question, Angela. It is, I think our value chain is incredibly complex and spreads very far and wide. And for us, as you mentioned before, rightly, it is a bit of the Wild West in terms of how we navigate this, because we're not in an established industry, nor are we an industry incumbent either, right? In financial services, we're not a big bank or a financial institution. Same on the logistics side. I think, so for us, what's important is that when we are kind of screening and looking at partners that we want to work with, that they do have a similar sense of kind of drive and motivation to work towards their own sustainability goals and also ours. In a lot of cases, it can be one and the same. I think in general, though, there is not as mature or advanced understanding of sustainability issues and how they correlate with kind of business profitability or success, right? In this region anyway. I would say that it's growing very, very fast. ESG is slowly becoming more and more mainstream as part of companies' kind of disclosures and the conversations and discussions they're having externally. But how does it actually look? And are these companies actually doing something to respond to those in a meaningful and a credible and oftentimes internationally aligned way? And the reason I bring up the international alignment is because in a lot of cases, yeah, the regulators are still working on what ESG looks like, right, from a domestic regulatory standpoint. And so we're doing a lot to provide, as much insights and practical on the ground experience and lessons, because we won't always get it right, but at least we can share those insights and learnings with all the partners that we work with. I think your question was around how we actually persuade some of our partners to do this, because yes, it is, it's kind of shifting from this is a cost to this is an investment I have to make. And so we're slowly seeing that happen. It's a little bit of a trickle, but I'm hoping that it does become a floodgate soon. For us, this is very much pre-competitive space, meaning that the lessons and the insights that we're sharing are for everyone to kind of benefit from, because everyone being our partners, our other companies across all the different industries, because some of them are industry agnostic. And so for us, I think it's, on top of conveying what we have invested in as a company in our sustainability goals and meeting those goals, and also ensuring that we're very clear about the business case here. That profit and purpose. I mean, I'm sure, Angela, you more than anyone is familiar with all these discussions happening around marrying profit and purpose and what have you. But we have found real ways where, you, for example, can reduce operational expenses of our merchants, because now all of a sudden we have very clear guidelines on on how to reduce excessive packaging. That's one, right? It's okay. It doesn't affect our direct bottom line as a company, but it affects the bottom line of our merchants, who are, the majority of them being micro entrepreneurs themselves, and so they're counting every rupiah or dollar. And so, I think it's finding ways to kind of that intersection between, yes, you can do right and do better and operate more sustainably, and no, it does not have to come at a cost to you. Another example I can give, again, on waste and packaging is within fulfillment centers, for example. We now have a kind of we're piloting and hoping to scale this in the year to come. But essentially, we now what we would have been spending on tertiary packaging every month, we now get some of that back because we have our suppliers ready to purchase back used packaging from our fulfillment centers that come back to us from our consumers. The consumers get a little bit of an incentive, a bonus or a reward on our platform. We get something a little bit back from our suppliers, and then they basically repurpose that the used packaging into 100% recycled packaging. This is a country very rich in natural resources. It is crazy to me that a lot of the packaging companies in Indonesia have to import waste from overseas because there's not a proper waste management / pickups or recycling infrastructure in this country. It has just been too logistically challenging and a very huge investment. So I think that needs to be made in that space. But it's just crazy to me that we have all these resources. For sure, we are generating enough waste. And so for us, it's working with our suppliers so that it brings down their costs too. If they don't have to import from overseas, it means they can get it domestically from our users. Our users get a little bit of a reward, as I mentioned before. And we get to reduce our operational expenses every month because we're not spending as much on packaging anymore, because we're getting some of that back when our suppliers purchase back the used packaging from us. I think the other thing I will say is that, with our intention here is not to necessarily make a huge profit on all of these sustainability related initiatives or our 3.0 related efforts, right? This is really about shifting the way that we do business. And if we can break even, that is great. Why? At this stage, at this point in time, if we're sticking with the packaging example, the market just does not have enough scalable or ready to scale solutions that are truly sustainable, meaning that they are compostable, that it's a reusable model. There are all still kinds of nuts and bolts that need to be figured out, and we just haven't gotten to that kind of critical mass yet where the pricing starts to become competitive. Because as you mentioned before, Angela, we are incredibly asset light. We don't, we can't control the operations of our merchants. We don't own the vehicles that the Gojek drivers are using. So for us, in every 3.0 kind of related initiative that we look at, we also have to make sure that whatever solutions we are offering or that we are co-developing or working with our partners on have to be cost effective, have to make sense for our drivers and our merchants as well. Otherwise, these things will never scale. And so I think, I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent, but I think back to your question, right? Like, it's finding partners that are similarly driven as we are, who know that there is a business opportunity here, but it's not going to come immediately. It's an investment that needs to happen now. Don't expect to make a huge profit right off the bat, and work with us, right, to redefine what it means to be a company in this day and age, for all the reasons that many of you, and Angela, of course, you are familiar with, right? It's not just consumer demand. It's also going to be increasingly stringent regulations around environmental issues in particular. And then on top of that, if you're a company, investors are becoming more and more savvy and more stringent also as it relates to kind of sustainability performance of companies. And so you need to be able to report something, you need to have something to report. And so making kind of credible, practical first steps, to me, is at least a step in the right direction. And so for us, it's better that we're working with some of our partners who may not be as advanced or in their sustainability journeys, but at least if we have them in our network and in our ecosystem, we can at least support them better and help get them maybe a little bit faster to their sustainability goals than if we weren't working with them in the first place.
Wow, there's so much there. I think that was a very good tangent. There have been quite a number of questions that have come in. And I think really, again, going back to the theme of like ambition as the key word that I took away, I really think what is happening now and the initiatives that you are driving forward has the potential of being able to drive the entire narrative around companies around the region who are looking to tap into, let's say, more international funding as more international investors come to the region, and us companies here tap into those international markets where it has, moved towards ESG. And then on the other side, like us consumers and all these users on the platform, many of whom are, in their 20s and very aware of these issues, become more demanding of what companies are doing as well. There's one particular question that was around the choices that GoTo is empowering users to make in terms of sustainable choices. I think that's very interesting. It's connected to the idea of like platforms are asset light, but they are a vehicle for data to be exchanged. They're it's sort of a mechanism for people to make a set of choices. And oftentimes, I think from the consumer perspective, it's like you're making choices. You're making maybe a not sustainable choice to, maybe one that is more sustainable. Do you foresee GoTo going towards something where the products, not just the direct operations right now, but the 40 or so digital products that you mentioned, do we see the products also moving in a direction where there are features that are to be developed as a part of the product roadmap for those things, where these choices are going to be embedded?
100%. And so, I mean, look, maybe I can say this, we are a product first company, right? So our approach always is how can we integrate some of these solutions, or how can we develop some of these solutions from a product perspective? Because if it's not in our app and not accessible by whether it be our driver or merchant partners or our users, then it's not going to scale across our ecosystem. And so one of the most recent examples I can give you is, first let me go through this. From the product development standpoint, we've actually now embedded environmental, so what we call ESG, right? We've now embedded ESG considerations as part of that product development cycle. What does that look like? It means that, are we releasing this product considering the environmental impact of it? It might be nothing, it might be something that's completely digital and, we use cloud services, so it's not even like we have data centers, but are we at least considering it as part of the product development planning process? Yes, great. The social side, it's around accessibility. Prior to this, we weren't really looking at, well, what if you have a visually impaired user or hearing impaired driver or merchant, right? How accessible is our platforms, and have they gone through the international verification processes? Because there are very clear standards as it relates to accessibility and different features you can use for visually impaired, hearing impaired, and other differently abled users, drivers, merchants, what have you. Basically, the entire for our entire ecosystem. And so those are some of the things, as I mentioned, that we've embedded it into our actual planning processes internally from a product perspective. Again, it might just be a very small, yes or no, or, if yes, then what do we have to do to make sure that we're mitigating that impact, that potentially negative impact, or that we are redesigning this feature in a certain way so that it does address, XYZ issues. Then I guess the example I wanted to give you, the most recent one, is we did just launch the latest feature on our platform for users. Because the other thing is, we talk about this a lot, but if we don't give our users something to do or take action on, then it's kind of like we're just doing a lot of talking and not really moving on anything, or allowing them to move on anything. And so for us, we started by where we realized we have all this data. We know where drivers are going, for example, on the Gojek side, every single day. And so what we did was built a back-end carbon emissions calculator. This for us ensures that our emissions inventory every year is as accurate as possible. So we're not just doing the inventory once a year now, it's actually happening dynamically every single day with every Go Ride or Go Car or Go Send order that goes out. Second is we provided users with an offset option. Now I will say this with the caveat that it's not that we want to kind of shift the burden or the responsibility to our users, but we do think it's important as part of the raising awareness, right, of your footprint every day. I mean, you are ordering this, you are making this Go Food order, you are ordering this Go Ride or this Go Car. For us, it's important that users know that actually, this is the estimation of the emissions that my ride or my food order is going to emit, right? And so here's something that you can actually do about it. And so the offsetting feature now is built into all the transport products on the Gojek platform, and we're going to scale it across food and other products as well later this year. But again, it's opt-in, right? So users don't have to do it, but the idea is that they have an option if they do want to take action. At the same time, for us, we're not calculating that as part of our offsetting. For us, we have to reduce and avoid emissions first and foremost, and then offset any residual emissions while we are still learning to get better and better at decarbonizing our operations and that of our value chain. So again, all these things are kind of like interlinked, but that's the type of features that we're looking at building. On the GoFood side, we've already got opting out of like things like cutlery and condiments and things, because most people are ordering in, right? They're at home. They should have cutlery and all the different. In Indonesia, we use a lot of sauces, a lot of chili sauce, a lot of additional condiments, and so most people will have those things at home handy. And so for us, it's make sure that you can opt out of those things. And we're starting to see more and more merchants, and we're supporting a lot more GoFood merchants be able to provide kind of compostable packaging or reusable packaging through the GoFood order. So again, consumers can opt in as part of the regular menu, as a regular menu item, right? They can opt in to purchase some of these things, so their order comes in a compostable, food package or a reusable, container or what have you. So these are things that are slowly starting to kind of come out. We have to do a lot of testing and sandboxing and trialing before we get to this point, but yeah, it is slowly starting to happen, and we're very optimistic that as more and more products and solutions, whether it's from the packaging or whether it's from the decarbonization standpoint, come to market, we'll be able to work with a lot of these partners. If we can't develop it or build it in-house, no reason to reinvent the wheel. For us, we're very happy to work with partners and integrate with other apps and what have you, so that these features are accessible and our users are able to really take meaningful action through our platforms.
That's awesome. That's very reminiscent almost, I think, of some of the things that we've seen develop in like the Chinese ecosystem around, let's say, the Ant Forest from Ant Financials, or initiatives to reduce sort of the packaging from e-commerce. So shifting gears a little bit, because I know we have not so much time left. I think, maybe just two final questions, like going kind of high level and then going specific. I guess the high level one is like, where do GoTo Group end and where does public policy begin? Because definitely one of the things is, you are here solving the issues of nations, right? Like they're no longer just issues of companies. And one of the stat I think that was very, I think resonated, I think, with the Philippines is the fact that both of the countries are island nations. A lot of the growth, the early growth from both Gojek, I think, and Topopedia came from key urban areas, right? So like Java, where let's say 50% of the population reside. And now the accessibility and the democratization of the services that you talked about is about reaching out to those that are outside of the key urban centers. That's a very similar parallel, I think, to what is also happening in the Philippines. It's linked to the economic development in those areas too. So with what you're working on now, these ambitious goals, what is the role of government in supporting that? How do you work with policymakers?
Super interesting question. I will say that I think so far in the experience, specifically on working on these sustainability goals that we have, right? We have a great working relationship with the different, ministries, and so government works at a local, regional, and a national level. I think it's very similar to the Philippines, right? And so at some points we have to work at those three different levels to get things moving. And so for us, I think because of the resources, the network, the reach, and the technology that we have, we're very uniquely positioned to be able to, as I mentioned before, sandbox some of these solutions or potential solutions before they are scaled on a mass scaled across, communities in this country. And I think, our government partners really appreciate that too, because unlike public sector, we have a little bit more kind of room as it relates to testing some of these innovative solutions, and it's our nature, as whether you're looking at it from a Gojek or Topopedia perspective, it's our nature to innovate, iterate, move fast and agile and all that. Governments, as all of us know, can't necessarily work that way for good reason, can't necessarily work or operate that way. And so for us, it's, can we find a nice balance where, from the public policy perspective, it's very clear what it is, and then we can actually test some of that implementation and whether it works in a practical, from an operational standpoint, because sometimes that's kind of, so for us it's like serving as an intermediary, I guess, in terms of what is happening from a policy standpoint to how it actually translates to on the ground action or movement from an industry or a community perspective. I will say this, I mean, I am a former public servant. Public policy is my background. I am a huge advocate and champion of government as an institution, right? I think policy is the most important tool we have as a society to respond to these huge pressing challenges. We can't look to private sector for the answer. Private sector, though, does have a responsibility to support those, and implement those policies and make sure that they're actually abiding by those, policies and regulations, because policy is the only thing that's going to be able to level the playing field. What is it if GoTo is doing what it can to decarbonize its operations, its value chain, if company B, next door is not doing it, right? I mean, these are sustainability challenges are something we all face collectively as a society. And so for one company to be doing it piecemeal, it's not going to get the impact that you want. Now, the only thing that levels that playing field is policy. If you make it mandatory and compulsory for all companies to disclose their emissions, to work on decarbonization, to set targets and so forth, then everyone starts moving that way. You can bet your bottom dollar or peso or rupiah that companies will find a way to do it in the most cost-effective and efficient way. If you say that all companies have to decarbonize, right? I mean, it's because it's in companies' nature, as I mentioned in the beginning, right, to maximize profit and do all those things. And so this is where I think working with government and policymakers to better understand the operational, on-the-ground realities that a lot of our, we have we're kind of a great intermediary also to these millions of merchants across the country, of which, as I mentioned, many are micro SMEs. So for us, it's like how we can use all the data and all the insights that we have across our ecosystem and our platforms to be able to share those with the government, so they know, for example, what kind of goods are being sent between, region or province A to B, and, what kind of mobility is happening, how many emissions are actually are going into the climate because of those types of and so for us, it's and because we're not from an established industry necessarily, it's supporting the government and being able to make sure that the regulatory environment is something that is conducive to the big sustainability challenges that we face here in Indonesia, and of course the other markets where we operate in Southeast Asia as well.
Yeah, that's really a perfect segue, because this event, and we are here at the final day and the final session of the event, has been put on by one of the government agencies, right, in the Philippines, the Department of Trade and Industries. And really, I think a lot of the audience here is we are both listening and learning from what is happening in the Indonesian ecosystem, as well as thinking about ways to apply that to us. I think I'm out of time to ask the final question, but it was going to be something like, okay, what sort of, very specific advice for the companies listening here? But if I were to, I think add one observation is the materiality assessment that you shared. It's very practical in terms of approaching, where are the areas where it could impact the business and where is it important to the stakeholders. So I hope everyone was able to take something away. And I know that I certainly learned a ton. There's I think an African proverb that I really thought of when I saw the name of the new group. And I think you might be familiar with this, Tanah, because you are also involved at the World Economic Forum. And it's that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that I really thought was, the definition and the meaning behind GoTo, other than the fact that it's Gojek and Topopedia. But with that, thank you so much, Tanya, for this very engaging conversation and great insights from the Indonesian ecosystem. And it's our hope that the Philippines will also move in that direction and be able to reach 2030 goals and all of those ambitious things on what sustainable lifestyles could look like for us. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Angela. Thank you, and to the team for having me. We really appreciate it.